Why don't we set the stage just for everyone who's joined this morning? My name is Justin Sparks. I lead vertical strategy here at InMobi. So really, what we lead is our go-to-market across our key verticals, retail certainly being one, and driving enterprise relationships with our clients. And Lindsay, do you want to introduce yourself and your role at Birch Lane?
Yeah, Lindsay Horrigan. Good to chat with you guys today. I am the Chief Marketing Officer of Birch Lane, which is actually a specialty brand that's owned and operated by Wayfair. I'm only a month into the job, so I started in December of last year. And previously I had been at Bloomberg media group where I was the global head of consumer marketing for all of our consumer media products and the general manager of the Bloomberg consumer subscriptions business. So on one hand, sounds wildly different. But on the other hand, all the mechanics are exactly the same. So still digital, still e-com, still consumer marketing. And so it's been really fun to start to get to know the retail industry and think about what similarities there are, that kind of comes from the media world or any of my previous experiences, and start to chart the next, phase of growth for the brand.
And maybe that's the right place to start. Is a simple question is, why Birch Lane and moving into retail? Just as you mentioned, you were at Bloomberg before, driving their subscription business, and previously you had stops in other industries with Amex and insurance. So why retail? Why now? Why Birch Lane?
Yeah, I am. Maybe I'm on a mission to try every industry over the course of my career. Thankfully, marketing has been the consistent thread across all of it. So, I think that's kind of the fun, or at least the fun that I've had with marketing is that, the fundamentals are usually unbelievably transferable. The mechanics are all the same. And so, if you're sort of a curious person like I am, learning new industries is part of the fun of the job, and figuring out how to go deep and what's going on there and what are the dynamics at play. It takes a little while to school up, obviously. But before you know it, there's just, I think, a lot of similarities that you can kind of pull over. But to your question, why Birch Lane, why Wayfair? So, I'm not sure how much everyone knows about Wayfair in general, but obviously the company's had an unbelievable growth run over the course of the last 15 years. They've only been public actually since 2014. And so it was such an incredible opportunity to be a part of the Wayfair platform. We have two co-founders, Neeraj Shah and Steve Conine, who are intimately involved and still running the company. And I think that's brought just a real engagement across the company. And so for me, it was a huge opportunity, I think, to be a part of that culture, but even still, the scale that the company has. We have 29 million customers across the Wayfair portfolio of brands. And one of the things that's obviously so fun to be a part of as a marketer is just we have best in class technology and sort of data operations. So, those things I think presented such an incredible opportunity for me to be a part of after a great run at Bloomberg. Birch in particular, and across all of the specialty brands. So essentially we have Wayfair, which is obviously more of our mass market play that many of you probably have purchased something from at some point, just given the scale and size that we have. But they also own Birch Lane, Joss & Main, All Modern, and Paragold. And so those brands are even newer, and they're more in the specialty space. And so they have a much more curated design profile. They have a much more specific customer subset. And these brands have been incredibly successful over the course of the last few years in terms of growth. But there's such an opportunity, I think, to scale it even further and really to double down on the brand. What's the long-term vision for these brands, and how do we think about growing them, beyond sort of riding the backs of the success of Wayfair?
Yeah, and that brings up, we had a chance to connect just before this morning last week, and so it's interesting, right? You come into a new space with retail on the back of, all the upending trends that have happened in the last 2 years, and Doug from Pearl Vision mentioned comps have been very high.
Yeah.
I imagine it's the same in the home and furniture category for Wayfair, but what's interesting, I think, for you, I imagine, is you're a consumer brand within a platform company and trying to really kind of build truly a world-class consumer brand. So how do you kind of think about that and working across, your fellow marketing leads across Paragold and Jocelyn Main and All Modern as you operate within this larger platform parent company, and going to market?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is like it's such an advantage, right? Like we have the platform advantage, and we have, the 29 million customers that we already have sort of visibility to. And so all of those things, start to put the formula in place. But the company is really, starting to really think about how to double down and to your point, build out some of these brands more robustly. And so, it presents like a really fun opportunity because I think we have all of the pieces in place. It's just a matter of like how we put the puzzle pieces together. And so, the brand, as I was saying, has been successful to date in terms of its growth strategy. Just how do we sort of like further amplify that going into the next phase? And so I think it really becomes more about fine tuning the brand, like looking for all those bits and pieces that to be, that your customers love you for, and how do you sort of pick out some of those nuggets that don't change, and start to figure out what, things you sort of can add on to that to open the aperture or make, the brand even more crisp, I think, to the people who love it, or even open up the door to new customers that maybe haven't heard of our brand. And I think that's some of the biggest opportunity probably with Birch in particular, is that we have a customer subset that knows and loves us. But there's also a lot of people who have not been exposed to the Birch Lane brand. And so I think as a marketer, everyone sort of probably has that experience where like, ooh, like think about all the opportunity. If only, you had XYZ awareness, or if only, you had the opportunity to sort of work on some of those KPIs that will help grow the brand. This is one of them. And so that's such a fun opportunity to walk into. We've got to think about how to balance our extreme strength and performance marketing, given that Wayfair is a platform. That's where the company has really been wildly successful and will continue to be, but we need to figure out how to balance that with a larger narrative about Birch Lane, about our product assortment, about who our customer is, and then how do we deliver on that. And so, it really becomes more about how we grow our broader awareness and affinity so that we can continue to drive loyalty. And as I was saying, all of the foundation is there of the things to be able to do that. And so I think it presents a really fun opportunity for the marketers involved as part of that strategy.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? You walked into an embarrassment of riches in terms of the data that you sit on, right? And the amount of users that you can see, and a robust and mature performance marketing engine, like you said. So, as you start to look at kind of coming in a handful of weeks into the job, what do you prioritize? Because, as a marketing lead for the brand, I imagine there's a number of routes that you can go. And I'll piggyback off of what Doug said in the last call is, how do you focus, right? And kind of go deep.
Yeah.
And how are you guys thinking about those strategic initiatives as you look to build a brand? And like you said, open up the aperture. You have a core user base and a core consumer base, but you're very much on an acquisition focus in terms of bringing in new customers to the funnel.
Yeah. For anyone in any of their jobs, like prioritization, I think often is the hardest thing for people to tackle. I mean, particularly for marketers, right? Everyone's sort of fielding from any one of their cross-functional partners, like, why are we doing this? Couldn't we be doing this? What if we just did this? And so there's like no shortage of things that you can do as a marketer. And so, the ability to prioritize, I think, comes down to a framework of sort of what you value and what you're trying to achieve. I think the great thing about Wayfair and about Birch Lane is that we're incredibly long-term focused. And so that's another gift, I think, is to be a part of a brand that is really thinking about not, what happened, certainly what we need to know what happens in the next 6 months, but in terms of the vision that we have for the company and for the brand, we're thinking a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years out. And so, how do you make prioritization decisions that help you keep the focus on the long term, and balance that with kind of some quick wins. And so I think that's a big part of any new job, is trying to figure out where you might be able to get a few quick wins, and then make sure that you're really making space and time for what you're trying to build for the long term. And I think in particular with Birch Lane, for me, there's so much going right. And so it's less about disrupting, you know, the near term of things that are the litany of things that are already ongoing, and really more focused on, okay, great. So like, what does actually this long-term vision look like for the brand? And what are the things that we back up from that we need to achieve and start to work on? And so I think, really, as I was saying, like making sure we fine tune the brand as much as possible, and making sure that permeates sort of the whole product offering. And so that's broader than marketing. That's sort of soup to nuts, making sure that we can deliver on what our aspiration is for a brand, whether it's, as Doug was mentioning in Pearl Vision, whether that's customer service, whether that's the product quality, assortment is obviously a big thing, that we're focused on, and making sure that we have the products that someone's looking for that delivers on sort of that brand promise. But it's the experience all the way through. And so, those things start to become much more long-term builds that you think about how you're going to build out. At the same time, I think the broader, piece that I'm sort of focused on from a prioritization standpoint, is how we also, just bring a new lens to how we think about the brand, and who this brand is for. And if that's the case, are we in all the right places to market that brand, right? And so sometimes that might be outside of typical performance channels. And so,
Yep.
that I think is going to be a big part of how we start to think about growing the brand in the future.
And so for those on the call who don't know who your brand is targeting today, maybe that's a
Yeah.
good place to start. And then I'll touch on the the long-term piece as well.
Yeah. So Birch Lane, is for, a traditional decor consumer. We know a lot about our consumer, as Justin was saying. Like, this is someone who's looking for confidence in their shopping experience. This is someone who really appreciates and values, traditions and family gatherings. And so, you can start to paint a picture of someone and all their sort of home decor needs, I think, based on this idea that they're really bringing family together, and friends, and sort of celebrating all of life's milestones. And so, what home for them is really this place that they kind of come together to be able to do that. And so I think, that's one of our like real guiding insights about the brand, which becomes really fun because you can kind of use that, not just in look and feel, but in how all of it comes together. Do we have the right decor items that someone can use sort of in that moment of gathering family together? Do we present that in the brand and how it kind of takes shape? And so, that'll be, I think, a big part of our ongoing journey over the course of the next few months in how we do that. But the core sort of doesn't change, in that, people know Birch, the customer, our core customer base knows us for high quality furniture, traditional furniture, things that we call sort of iconic Birch Lane, whether that's couches or certain tables, things that they know exactly what they're getting with the brand. And so we'll want to continue to deliver on that while we sort of evolve some of these more fun and joyful moments, I think, that the brand can start to represent.
Yeah, and as you kind of walk through the brand, I remember I'm like many during COVID, I moved and had to get new furniture, and you're kind of looking for something that you can keep. And living in New York, there are a lot of things that you can't keep long term.
Yes.
But as you move between apartments, so I definitely can relate to that just individually. But as you start to think, one of the things that was surprising to me and kind of prep for this is how long Birch Lane has been around. So it was launched in 2014. It's not
Yep.
necessarily an old brand, but it's certainly been around for just shy of a decade. But as you guys expand, going back to your comment before, going from kind of really having this performance marketing engine, how are you guys thinking about new channels and omnichannel? I know, your CEO has come out in the last year and said you guys are going to experiment with in-store formats and
Yeah.
look at different ways to reach consumers outside of just a marketplace and an online presence.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the fun part of this next phase. So we are launching physical retail. And I think, again, that'll be a big part of a broader channel, omni-channel strategy. But I think at its core, it's sort of delivering on what the customer is actually looking for. And so we, as I'm sure will be talked about in numerous points, throughout the course of the agenda today, you know, brick and mortar is still a really important part of the overall commerce experience. And so
Yep.
the fun part about launching it after decades of success as an e-com business is that you get to really think about starting from scratch. How do you want that experience to fit into an overall customer experience and journey versus we have retail in store and we have a website. And that's, I think, as we all know now, that's not actually how most customers experience brands and how they shop in general. And so you might flow between, various channels at any point in time. And I think retail is probably one of the best examples of omni-channel, even beyond some of the other industries that I worked in before. Because oftentimes the purchase that you're making might require a few different moments where you're evaluating the product and you're kind of thinking about it. And so I think it's a much more non-linear journey to purchase. And so physical retail, for us, I think is going to be a big part of continuing to enhance that experience for customers. One of the things I love about sort of the mantra and mission of Wayfair is that, the mission across sort of our owning home is actually giving customers the confidence to buy. And so physical retail is one of those ways that we can give customers the confidence to buy. I think we've all sort of learned to buy a couch off the internet, but it's really nice if you can go in and double check what that couch actually looks like, touch it, feel it, get some inspiration, on how you might accessorize and bring that to life. And that's just, certainly there are digital ways that we're doing that, of course, with AI, other content marketing experiences. But I think physical retail is just another great way for us to open up a place to talk to customers. It's a great way for us to express the brands. If you kind of think about what I was mentioning with sort of the next phase of growth for these brands is really, in the affinity, in the awareness space, physical retail also, checks a marketing box, right? Like you have a presence. Someone drives by a store, they're able to see it. Someone can walk in and actually touch and feel and see what that brand's really about. And so I'm really excited, I think, to, for the future on that with Birch Lane. We just announced last fall that we're at the end of last year that we're opening up Joss and Main and all modern stores this year, which is really exciting. And so we'll be building out stores for all of our specialty retail brands. And so Birch obviously will be a part of that. And so it's really fun to think about, I think as a marketer, it's one thing, to kind of pull your brand together and think about how that's going to express digitally. It's another really fun creative expression to think about how that's going to, play out physically and in person. So very excited about that. I mean, back to kind of omni-channel in general, I think, to your point, like we've been really strong in all the performance channels, obviously commerce, advertising that's happening on search, that's happening on some of the social channels, affiliates, et cetera. We have a really strong infrastructure that's built out to do those things. I think what the next phase of that though is like there are new channels that we're not in. The Birch Lane brand right now is not in video. It's not on connected TV. We're not in SMS. And so there's a lot of channel opportunities, specifically for Birch Lane. If I think about who this customer is and I think about, the needs that they might have and the need for confidence and how we can kind of guide them through a shopping experience and help show them what their home, could look like and how to sort of think about design and quality pieces and how that comes to life. There's a lot of other channels where we can start to do that. And so there's an opportunity, I think, for us to open up into those channels. The key for us and for all, performance-oriented marketers is how do we evaluate what those channels are doing for us? And so, there's no wrong or right way to do that yet, I think. And, some of the last 5 to 10 years, I think, of the marketing industry is sort of, we've convinced ourselves that like, every metric is truth, and that when we do X, we get Y, and we know that, 10 times over. And to an extent that is true, but there's also the reality, that I think a lot of the performance stuff, that's happening right now is really predicated on, like some of the changes that are going to be happening on the privacy landscape sort of impact that, but B,
Yeah.
It's what you set up. And so I think it'll be interesting to watch and think about how to navigate, branding, performance branding in sort of this next era, when you need to do some of these more awareness, affinity, loyalty oriented things. And so how do you think about measuring them on these new channels? And so I think that'll be a big part of the fun challenge, with this brand and for many others.
There's a lot that I would love to unpack
Yeah.
from that, Lindsay. So, I think maybe let's just start with that last piece, right? Is the things that came to mind as you were just chatting through that is, obviously measurement changes for you as you start to explore different brands and what's that mix look like. But we're also coming into this, from my perspective, we're coming into this kind of new age of how do you use content with social and influencer content, increasing. One of the things that we've talked about extensively at InMobi since I've joined the company is, 4.5 hours on average is the average time spent for an American on their mobile device every day. And so as you start to think about like where the attention, and if you really just simplify marketing and advertising, like where are the eyeballs going, like they're increasingly going to screens, and smaller screens as people are in their homes and staying at home. So how do you think about, just as you guys are starting to open up these new channels and trying to build affinity and a branding message, what type of content would you lean into, I would say over the next year or two, that maybe 2-3 years ago you wouldn't have thought of in your prior role?
Yeah, for sure. I think for us, it is about content in general, right? We're coming from a place where I think on some of these, brands, specifically on Birch Lane, I think Wayfair is a little bit further along, certainly. So I'll speak more on Birch Lane, but we don't have the content piece yet, right? We have an amazing sofa, we have an amazing chair. And so, we've got some of the pieces, like where does it fit in? We've got it, for example, we have some great like 101 guides to sort of buying upholstery and how to stylize it. And so the team, I think, is working really hard to start to build out some of this more content driven stuff that can surround the actual product. And, but then when you think about building that out, where do you deliver that and how do you deliver that? And so,
Right.
To your point, like people are on screens, like you really have to think very thoughtfully about like the place that you're actually marketing and then what you want to deliver. Because I have many times over in all of my marketing, roles, you'll come up with this great marketing idea and then you get to the like finish line and it's like, oh, but it's only going to go in this one little spot, or it's going to only go over here. And like, I don't know why that still happens for everybody. I think, you kind of just go off, put your head down and try and make something great. And then unfortunately you wait too long to sort of reconcile those things. So, I think for every marketer, you have to really think like along the whole journey about exactly where something's going to show up. And so that's kind of I think the balance against some of this content stuff, which like you need more time, you need more space to sort of deliver on some of these experiences, whether it's something more mid-funnel content oriented, like an upholstery buying guide or styling coastal setting in your kitchen, or even if it's more just brand narrative stuff, like what is Birch Lane and what do they stand for and what are they about? You need time and space and format to be able to do that. And to your point, it becomes more and more challenging to find those locations to be able to do that. I mean, that being said, I think everyone knows there's obviously a lot of advancements with the social platforms and the connected TV platforms to be able to like provide experiences like that. And so, we're going to continue to explore how we can double click into those environments and deliver, that sort of experience there, whether that's through our brand or whether that's leveraging other influencers or someone else to help us do that. but really trying to be immersive into the experiences that we're in. And sometimes that seems obvious, but you can create content that you think is just going to run on social, and then you all of a sudden get to uploading it on Instagram, and you're like, oh, this is still not like sized right. Like this would have worked on Facebook, but not on Instagram. And so you have to be really specific, I think, which is hard for some brands because that's resources, staffing, etc., to be very specific for every platform about what you're doing. But it's going to be really hard to be, I think, wildly authentic and effective if you're not doing some of that. And I think, that was coming from my media background, obviously, even publishers, obviously, who have, staffed up all sorts of people to work on delivering content and news, because that's the actual business and the product. Even publishers struggle to make sure that they're customizing it for all these places. And so a brand who's not in the business of making content necessarily is definitely going to struggle. And so then it becomes down to kind of your earlier point about prioritizing. You can't really be all places and do it well. And so, I think that's the big challenge, for all brands, and certainly for us at Birch Lane, is we're just thinking about, like, sure, it'd be nice if we could be everywhere, but practically speaking, that's not possible for us to deliver the experience that we want to. So how do we prioritize which places that we're in, and then try and go deep and make sure that we're, being really contextual about our experiences that we're delivering there. So I think certainly some of the social channels will do that. I think, we look to sort of expand, I think, into the connected TV space as well, where we can do that. We can also be much more performance oriented in an experience like that, which is, I think, brings some of our core, philosophy into, and think about how to build that out.
Yeah, and it's something that we're hearing a lot from our advertisers as well. To your point around just the operational side of being able to have a curated message according to the channel or the platform that you're marketing on. It's resource intensive. Maybe influencers and kind of the growing presence that they have within marketing budgets does help take some of that off, because you're not producing as many versions of an ad or imagery, and playing within character limits that cross different platforms, and all the things that you have to worry about as a marketer, and just kind of the execution side. I want to go back just quickly to your comments on building the experience in store and translating that online to offline, because obviously that's going to influence the type of content that you guys build, and really probably the brand narrative over the next couple of years. How do you do that? I mean, how do you guys start to think about what is the in-store experience that you want to drive with your brand, knowing you're a digitally native brand, you have a good presence online, you have an app that's functional and used by your core customers? What's that step? Because it's interesting for me, because we talk a lot at InMobi with brick and mortar retailers who are moving online, and so it's a different direction and set of priorities that they need to do. But curious how you kind of look at building out that experience, and like, what do you want to maintain in the real world touch and feel tactical experience that you'll have in store that translates from your online brand?
Yeah, so I think again, just to my earlier comment about like making sure they're integrated, and it really is like an omnichannel experience. I think what you'll see us do is bring all of the things that we do really well digitally and that people know us for, kind of our core value proposition, we'll bring that into the physical space. So, one of the things I think about all the brands that we have is about you could get a product in 2 days. Like, it's that fast, right? We own a lot of our logistics and shipping operation. And so for many, I think, retail stores, like, you're going and you're seeing something, and then they're like going and looking up in a system and a book and being like, maybe 12 weeks, 10 weeks. And how disappointing is that? Right? Like, you're
it's
there,
very
you want
frustrating.
it. It's so frustrating. And so I think, that'll be one of the big things that we can bring to bear, I think, in the physical experience, is just sort of merging some of that real-time information, what items are in stock, what items aren't. We also have quite a bit of technology around sort of visualizing items in your space. And so I think, I don't know if you ever used that tool on ours, but it's pretty cool. You can sort of be checking out a lamp 1 minute and then holding your phone up to some, place that you are sort of at home. And so I think some of that technology can, while you won't be at home holding the camera up to the place that you'd like the lamp, I think some of that same sort of philosophy around making sure the item sort of fits for your space can kind of translate as well. And just being able to like also know who the full customer is, right? Like, there's all sorts of just fun and I think innovative and digital things that are already core to what our product is online that we can bring into the physical space as well. And figuring out, and I think the fun challenge, and we have some amazing experts at the company that are working on this right now. The fun challenge is thinking about how to make sure we can bring that value prop into the physical space and make sure the experience feels integrated and merged. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what they come up with and how that's going to play out.
Yeah, it's an exciting role to be in, I'm sure, as a marketer, to be able to really kind of build that from scratch and take a brand that has an identity and then a presence and try to put that into a new environment. The other side of that, and as you think about going into stores and the omnichannel approach, how are you guys thinking about connecting those experiences, right? So someone who does go and look in store, or they looked at the product. So if you haven't downloaded the Birch Lane app, they have this very cool function where you can pick a lamp and you can scan your room and it'll show you kind of where you want to place it in the room. And so how are you guys thinking about both, I think, connecting the experience, which you just walked us through a little bit there, but also then on the back end, just understanding your customer more, right? And how they're using your different channels. And then obviously going back to what we talked about before, designing content and kind of our approach to messaging those customers and those different cohorts, depending on how they engage with you as a brand.
Yeah. I mean, I think like the sort of the customer centricity remains at the forefront of how we think about any of these new things that we're sort of forging into, right? And so, we're just, we're sharing data across all those channels, and we have a centralized place that we're doing that. And so it all kind of comes back to like who the customer is, what sort of actions are they taking, how do we sort of personalize that experience for them as best that we can, and use that to sort of, trigger and waterfall out whatever other experiences that we may or may not give you. And so, if I take that into the digital world, like if you're shopping for X, Y, and Z, or for example, if you're shopping for a couch, we're going to retarget you in some of the communications that you're getting with couches that we think you're actually going to like and buy. And so, the company's got pretty advanced sort of, technology and data science that's powering a lot of that stuff. You can start to think about how that might translate into the physical space as well, but it's going to come down to needing to, to having that customer data point information. How we actually execute on that, I think, is still, in formulation as part of sort of our strategy and build out of the physical operation overall.
Great. And I think we're coming close to time here, Lindsay. So why don't we do this? Let's have one closing question, and then
Sure.
I think there's one or two Q&As, and that should wrap us up. But from a trends perspective, what are you watching or anticipating going into this year that you believe isn't getting enough attention?
It's certainly the privacy landscape is getting plenty of attention, but I think the piece for me that I'm watching, and obviously it's quite relevant for my current role, is just the reality that I think, people are making a lot of adjustments based on the privacy landscape, like new ways of measuring, or then we'll do this, but it sort of all feels like same, and just adjusting on it overall. And I don't know that I'm seeing enough places make seismic shifts to the way they just think about marketing a product, period. And so I'm watching to see how brands sort of like go back to square one, and sort of what we were touching on before, is just like, who's my customer? Where are they? Where should I be reaching them? And that's not to say to like throw out all of the like, deeply data rigorous things that have occurred over the course of the last few years. But I sense, and maybe some of this is too just coming off of working at a publisher technically beforehand, but there's just a lot of, I think there's just a lot of, most people are really just trying to figure out how to fix something in the short term and aren't necessarily thinking about the broader landscape of just, maybe doubling down on, do people know about our brand? Do they have affinity for our brand? Are they loyal to our brand? And what are the ways in which I'm going to do that, which is very different from buy this thing, click on this thing, click on this thing. And you need the latter also. But I'd be really curious to see how things sort of shake up for brands and whether they kind of go back to square one at all and how they're thinking about this.